Just make sure I'm live. So good afternoon. This is the Native Wellness Power Hour every Wednesday, and I'd just like to welcome everybody today. And my name is Lori Newbreast. I'm broadcasting from the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana on a crisp, cold day. Right now, all our groundhogs are asleep. So, they're hibernating, doing what they do. So we rely on our cultural knowledge to talk about the winter and spring predictions. But today I'm joining you, and our topic is wellness and care, and really to look at, not together, sharing each other's views in this medium, but during this cyberspace, but also to be considering about what that means, the actions of caring. And there's another Native Wellness t-shirt I have that says, healing is a verb, wellness is a verb. And really, in all of our languages, whatever nation you come from, they were about, like they describe them in English as animate. We were in the action of living the way that we wanted to live. And in considering using this language to communicate across tribes, but also really with ourselves, it's really sort of like one tool to consider what it means, to understand when even something I may say today, how you put it in your, how it's received into your mind, how it's received into your body, your heart, your emotions, and really understand that it's going, when we receive information as individuals, particularly around wellness, or right now we're under, it's like, it's very vibrant to be alive right now. We're asked to change in midstream. We're asked to incorporate dense scientific knowledge, or, figure out how maybe to even boil an egg for the first time in our life. One of my very competent younger relatives today, he put on another social media platform, these boiled eggs, how come they don't peel? And I was like, oh, should I put it in the comments? And I thought, no, because there's a reason, like when you boil eggs, it says a lot about the egg. And there's a lot of teachings in our cultures about our use of how we used to feed and care for ourselves. But what I appreciated about him sharing that, because I follow other people too on social media, but I follow a lot of my cousins, because I haven't always been able to see them in real life. So that particular one I hadn't seen since last July, since July 4th, 2021. But to know that he's making an attempt to boil an egg, I thought, woohoo, because I think sometimes caring is as simple as that. Taking a healthy risk and boiling an egg, drinking water every once in a while between other drinks or beverages, or teas. And those acts of simplicity in caring for yourself, they're like that pebble in a lake. They have waves and waves and waves out to, like, the energy you're giving back into the environment we live in. So this morning, yesterday, we had a cold front come in, and So it's -16, but there was no wind. And that's our caveat. That's kind of like where I live, our grounding relevance. It's the wind that really directs so much of our world. And so if I say, to somebody that maybe is listening in Hollywood, Florida, or, from the Seminole Nation down there, it's -16, they might just like say, think, why do you live there? But it's an understanding of where you are also on earth. And I think a simple tool to get through when you're hearing all these things and, maintaining your balance is really to consider the place you are on earth. And to stay grounded, like in that very basic knowledge. When is the sun shining? When does the sun rise? When does it set? Is it going to be windy? Or can you understand how to read? Maybe if you live like me in a rural part of what people call rural part, but it's our home. It's our homeland. So there's knowledge older than America about our landscape, about the world we live in, the teachings of the sites that have cultural significance to us. And so where I live, one of my elder cousins that is, she's walked on, but I live very near. I live near her children. We had been sitting one day during a winter like this, similar but not the same. And we both worked at the same place, and she was on her second career, but really she had about 5 careers going on at the same time, because she was a typical Indian woman of her generation. You always have all these, as long as your main career is being the best, the sweet to pea or the best indigenous person you can be, everything else will work out. But we had been sitting there and we were looking out at the mountains, and we're about 25 miles from this one mountain. And then the mountain farther back from that, we were maybe 50 miles. But she looked at them and we were just saying, oh, it's so beautiful, because there had been no wind. And all of a sudden you could see on that distant mountain a little wisp, and the snow flew up in the air. So she told me, oh, well, we have about an hour and a half, because we both lived far away from on the reservation, away from the office. She said, we have about an hour and a half before it starts blowing. And she was right. And she goes, and when it gets near this, she was pointing to the closer the mountain, you have really about 25 good minutes, but 45 minutes. So what she was telling me was, we were just visiting. And so some years later, I shared that conversation with another relative. And they said, I didn't know she knew that. So sometimes care is when you end up having a conversation with somebody in your family, maybe at the grocery store, especially during this time. I had a conversation with off the reservation yesterday with an 83-year-old lady that's still running her own shop. And I came in and I was like, she's from a different culture, but we started talking and she said, well, are you getting enough vitamin D? Because when you live in a northern climate, our need, whether it's from beautiful fish or from, buffalo meat or elk meat, or our need is different, because our relationship with the sun changes from someone in the southern hemisphere. But in that conversation, we united, or we connected around that we were both busy doing what we needed to do on this very cold winter day in anticipation of the below zero temperatures. So sometimes caring is just being open to those opportunities where you can make a human connection with yourself, with another person. And there's a lot of practices that there's a lot of this is like one saying, I would say, since the early 90s, 1990s, last century, that I have really come back to many times in my wellness journey, is let it begin with me. And as I've moved through this space this time on earth, I really have considered what that means at different ways in different. So a couple times, it meant early on that when I wasn't surrounded by, there were still people in their own journey of wellness, but the commitments I had made to myself, to my family, my community, to the Creator, didn't match the people I was surrounded with. And sometimes what I knew I could do, because somebody had shared that, let it begin with me, is to pay forward the attempts I was making and the practices that were sticking and the way I felt in my heart, that I know we can work our way out of this. And that saying, let it begin with me, a lot of times I paid forward my recovery and whatever that meant, my healing, my happiness, my energy, my time, my cooking skills. And by doing that, by paying attention to my care of myself and my commitments, when I would encounter people, I could have those conversations that I had yesterday. And I've had many of those opportunities. And then also to know people that may be in my, we use this term around here. You don't need to use it. I'm not saying, speak like me, but our blood relatives. So what I understood in my life is that when I knew people as a child and they were acting somehow, and maybe they weren't themselves, maybe they were under the influence, maybe, I seen them on the last day that, I was visiting because they had, they wanted to clean up before they see me, or that they were so busy, they were in another part of the world doing work or something. But I had those opportunities to reconnect with people at different parts in my life and in theirs. And my cousin, we had a friendship, we could share, we had a lot of the values. And because I remembered stories that from when I was little, and that I was intended to hear, that I wasn't supposed to hear, but I've always had, that's one of the things that I've been, as much as I can talk, I can also listen. So sometimes in my journey, I have met people at different points in their life, but it's always this reaction that I have, especially now. I'm glad to see them. I'm not going to take their inventory about what they should be doing. I'm just glad that I see them living, being. And I really have taken that to heart during this time when we're struggling to negotiate our way through many things. And a lot of our communities are highly responsive and successful. And I owe my life, right? My protection, how I've gotten this far during the last couple of years, to a community, to people that I know, people I work with in my digital village. You know, and often the digital village is sometimes intertribal, like right now, right? We're from many nations, many corners of the world. And that mere act of showing up, of being present, is one of the techniques of caring that you give for yourself. When you show up for yourself, really means that embracing those journeys and those beautiful moments of the things you've been gifted with life. If you had a meal today, if you had water, if you had a warm blanket, I don't know, if you had those exotic Indian print curtains and now you've got the full set, the Indian print curtains hanging off your window, you have the car seat cover, the steering wheel cover, and then maybe your blanket's one of those fuzzy fleece blankets with the Indian print on them, you know, like those are all things to be grateful for. And it's the small things, but they're not small because they hold. They're like, if you want to say, the nanostring that is the universe all put together. They connect us, those feelings. But they're also that basis to say, like for a self question, am I able to also give today? And I wanted to, it's kind of like in, I find the English language fascinating. So, you know, I kind of thought, it's kind of like one of my little hobbies. I don't play Candy Crush, but I look up words, the origin of words. I guess that's my candy. But these two phrases or descriptions, caretaking and caregiving. And I want to talk about, like, in wellness, like some people have a very concrete description of those two things. But it's also could be used like a thermometer to do your own self checks right now. And now, right, we're all supposed to get those free, you know, COVID-19 home testing kits, you know, right? You know, where it was socially unacceptable to let a stranger clean your nose for you. We overcame that in the pandemic. So, but it's also along that same vein. You kind of take your temperature on where you're at. And do you have a practice of making sure your needs are met so that in the act of interacting with people, that it doesn't develop an agenda to get your needs met? And that's like one definition of caretaking, is that there is a wager going on for that interaction. And in some places, that's what you need. Like and sometimes in negotiation, that's like a technique, you know, kind of that exchange of two parties meeting. The word, most Americans don't think like this, but like if I said the phrase tribal consultation, most people would know what that means, nation to nation. And so if you think of that concept of human to human, and you have a relevance or like kind of like a toolkit to say, am I ready? What is my readiness? Just to be aware. You know, you don't have to stay by yourself till you're you're ready, but just to have that awareness. And so sometimes that difference, if there's an agenda in caring, a tit for tat, or if you need that person to act in a certain way, or you need to have you're negotiating for more acknowledgement and more, thank you card or I don't know. If there's a negotiation under caring or caretaking, that's really the difference. And what it is it's kind of like a thermometer to say that all of those things, wanting acknowledgement, to be acknowledged, to have relationships, to have connection, are really about that big principle of belonging. And so the second question that has, or phrase, slogan, hashtag, whatever you want to call it, in wellness that I've used for myself was, and I heard it in many different ways, is how do you belong? And in those moments, if you feel yourself going into that caretaking, or you're saying, how am I today? Let me check in with myself. Really, that is, how are you belonging to yourself today? Have all those basic needs been met? And when I mean basic, I mean like in the Indian way, like your spiritual part, are you safe? Are you comfortable? There's all kinds of lists, and it's sometimes specific to individuals and to cultures, what that means. But how do you belong to yourself? And that can also be, there's all kinds of teachings about how you move through changes in a good way, and be a good relative. There's a lot of nice sloganing. I see really love things. More people expressing love to people, and that's one of the things I've noticed. I tell people, even on meetings, but how do you belong to yourself? How do you belong? And in communities and in the changes we're living through, how do you belong in your culture? How do you re-belong to your culture? How do you reconnect to yourself? Maybe there is a life change that you go to, and you have to be your own best parent. How do I belong to being my own best parent? What would I expect? And so in caring, there is that community, there are those relationships, but there's that overarching kind of question or desire, because we're born humans. We have some natural things in common, even with people who live differently. The need to belong, it's not even the need, it's the energy of belonging. In the outside cultures, sometimes it's described as an unmet need, or like, it's kind of, because the way sometimes sometimes through their cultural lens, is to focus on what you don't have. Because I've thought about that a lot during the pandemic. What do I have? What is real? What connects me to not just other humans at this time, but what connects me to the world I live in, to the wind, to the sun, to the earth? And what am I seeing in the short time that I've been on this trip on the earth, right? And I've thought of a lot about my journey in wellness, and that it's had many, I didn't have a roadmap, but by connecting with people in the community and who cared for that, they cared for every Indian, an Alaska Native, Indigenous person, they cared for it all. They cared for the galaxies, the stars, because we are the recipients of cultural ways. And if you want to, I just seen this and I just thought, yeah, that's a one way. Yeah. You know, we have a collective, like, soul connection to everything in creation. And we also during this time have time to make changes. If we ask, how do we belong to the earth? And we see that the ancestors, through relationship, through exchange, through gifting, were helped through ceremony. At the origin of our core teachings of our cultures, that long before there were any changes to them, we were gifted practices that connected us, that helped us belong to things, to the galaxy, to the universe, to the earth. And I've been reminded of that when I would hear things about, this winter we're having, and it's one winter of many winters, and I mean many winters. And how did my people think of these events rather than around years? Like, because there's kind of like a countdown now, like we've been through year one, we've been through year two, we've been through, we're into the third year of the global pandemic. So I was thinking, well, how did I belong to that time, that ebb and flow of everything? And the practice that we had culturally was the winter count, but it wasn't just one winter count. It had the symbol for our representation of time. And that infinite spiral was where things that were significant were put on there. And often I've thought about the wellness journey that I've been on, the things that I've done, the discovery of what works for me, what fits, what doesn't fit. And that it is my own individual journey. But what gives it that belonging is the cultural way that I see how I belong. And I think as an example, one of Native Wellness's primary principles, it's kind of like Star Trek, Star Wars, galactic heroes, Anyway, I think that whole galaxy thing, they're kind of basing it on us, but that could just be me. But really, when I'm looking at this concept of this big concept, how do I remain and take care of what's in front of me? My daily responsibilities, but also those things that I've chosen to do. And that's all individual for people, because some people are gifted in a way, and some people have, the gifts are infinite. We don't know all of them. And the paths, as long as we're on that path of what those gifts have helped us, that we arrived with at birth, it's going to be okay. But in these big moments, what grounds me? That's another way to say it. How do I belong? How do I belong to the earth? And so for me, this morning I was up before dawn because the nighttime and the dawn, the twilight they're like faded together right now during this time. And so the sun, the Tusi, comes up different on the horizon. And so I seen it was going to be a clear day. And the minute I seen light through the curtains, because of the cold, I had to keep them shut, I tied up all my curtains. And when it came up above the southern horizon, I opened the door. It was cold. And I stood on the porch and I welcomed the day. So at its core, belonging is about action, about where you're at in this part of the earth. And it's the same thing. I set out my intentions. You hear my little Chihuahua pug. Let me see if I can get her over here. Come here. Lady. Come here, lady. She probably wants me to, she's on a snuggle schedule. That's how she belongs. So now if you can see her, she's just so cute. She has a little squeaky animal, which is her clue, the computer. She could talk, she'd be saying, the computer, or my little squeaky toy and my snuggle. But she seems like she's okay right now. And so when I think about during this time, because I seen all the stuff about the groundhog, and I was like, I hope they look up at the sky, because that will tell you a lot. And that also comes from this particular place on the earth, but no matter where you're at, the color of the sky tells you a lot of conditions about water, about some places call it air quality, but really what's in the air. And it changes the total light of where you're at the winter time. There's a type of blue that only comes back in the spring. And the variation of the sky is so complex throughout the day, because now there's snow on the ground and we haven't had the heavy winds or, to move the snow. So there's a bright reflection that my human eye, when I look up to the sky, it's affected by that bright. It's like the biggest ring light in the world for those of you that use ring lights in your work, right? To appear online, or in your life to appear online, or in your selfie on social media. So right now, what's on the ground is, no matter the technology, it changes the whole brightness of the world that I live in. So being aware and caring about going outside, caring about my relationship with the earth, the weather, the snow. And I just want to, sometimes I feel like I need to say this. Snow is water. And that recognition that water is doing its thing by being snow. It's making some promises that through shared knowledge to us. And the people I'm from, the culture I'm from, we have a way of expressing our belonging, our hope for our entire community, our hope for the earth, our hope for our way of life, our hope for all of those relationships that we've formed and been given to have a culture, to be Miswitipi, to be, who we are. And we have a saying that during this time in the heavy winter, like, I'll see you when the green grass grows. Because we know that that will happen somehow. And as we move through this time, where now, we can't really make any of them solid itineraries for the end or the acknowledgement of the transition to where we could say we're coming out of this time, that we've all been sharing as the human family on Earth. But the Earth is telling me through the snow and through the conditions, and that the Earth is adjusting. It knows what it's doing. But in our relationship, it's also to honor those that knowledge that the green grass will come. That's what we've been given for many generations, to have that type of thinking, that collectively. So when I've heard that families have, right now, maybe a member is ill, it could be with anything, not just COVID-19 or any of the variants, but it could be the flu or something else that is the family's collective energy is trying to help that person. I think of that. My prayer is that we all make it to the green grass, or those of us, we make it to the green grass as a collective. And because we're born human, we all arrive there to the future, whether in spirit, whether as an ancestor, or as part of the living generation, or the beings that help us in all our cultures. That there isn't a description in the English language to encapsulate those beings, because those teachings are older than most of the practicing disciplines and academies of science. But they're science nonetheless. They're the science of the place that we occupy, of the cultures, of the way we think, our systems of knowledge, of how we represent relationships. So today I also want to be a little, kind of like, if we come back down and you've been, in whatever way you describe this for yourself, on a wellness journey. Because I think for me, I was born into a wellness time because I came from a culture that they had wellness practices. And I'm a descendant of wellness. I'm a descendant of collective thought. I'm a descendant of all that beautiful knowledge that's held in my DNA, in the practices that I am a part of, in the culture that renews our relationship. Because the mountains were here before my birth, and they'll be here after. So there is and the earth was here. And so to really have those wellness, like to own that's part of our culture. But when you experience disruption, like all of us, and that we have a recent example in all our lives where we're asked to change minute by minute. And the things maybe we guided our lives with before, now we're asked to change them, or they change. And sometimes there's opportunity in that. One of the things I found I enjoyed lately is I watch tech videos I think it's fascinating, where I'm hoping as we move through this and the skill, really if you want to say the online engagement in all Indigenous communities has been, we've rose to that challenge. Where now we do things like the power hour is an example of it. All the stuff that was able to meet virtually, we've mastered skills on that. And for my people in the Blackfoot Confederacy, because we're here in the States, but also in Canada, we got her done when we had to share teachings, but not those the appropriateness, to understand the appropriateness of this online interaction. And values and principles in describing them. That's why when I hear other Indigenous people speak that are from outside my culture, that's why I can identify with them. Because there are a lot of points of commonality or things we have in that cultural connection, that the two cultures coming together, or many cultures coming together, that have values and principles of them. And that belonging one, that's shared by all humans. And sometimes where it goes awry is when you're asked to belong not as who you are. And that works when you're talking about yourself individually on your wellness journey, but also when you're living in a multicultural, multi-tribal, environment, or maybe you're in another part of the world and you listen to the Wellness Power Hour. I don't know, wherever you are, it's when you are either asked or there's demands on you not to be who you are. That's when things go kind of wacky doodle. And that's a scientific term. I kind of like that word. I didn't expect to say it, but wacky doodle, doesn't that cover a whole bunch of stuff right now? So, but I thought when I was going to share today and just have this, because I really feel honored, to even have this much of your precious time. So I want to thank you, everybody that's out there in this moment. I want to thank you for that, because that's like a gift, to know that I'm out there making a connection and being connected and being received and being acknowledged, and that is that's a gift. So in this moment, you are the caregiver. And that's the way I approach this hour. That I was in a space after I did all those things, and I heard some brilliant words by people from one of the tribes in Oregon, and I just heard this kind of very diplomatic language used to bring up in another way with people that aren't from our communities. It was asked, not only how do we belong to your system, how do you belong to our world? And that's a real, I think, message of empowerment. That we're coming as strength. We're rebuilding our strength. We're rebuilding our wellness. We're practicing our wellness. It's a moment where all our cultures and our nations are going to be different when we walk out of this time period into the future. Because we've realized a lot of things about the strength of our connections. And for me, like I am just like, some days what I've learned about my community, throw a complex problem at us and we figure it out. And so in those acute moments before the vaccines were available, because that's our people, were made a decision, the leadership, about ways to get to that day. And it was through collective effort. And so seeing that, and then hearing from somebody outside my culture today through this medium about stand, you want to know how to stand in power? You stand in power because you belong. You belong. Everybody belongs. And that's how you move forward. And when we're asked to change that, we can't go back to those olden days. Because, if you think some people would, I know people, normal, well, nobody's ever really just used that in describing me, but I thought normal. March 2020, no, thank you. Because really, that was when I seen it was put back on the agenda. You belong, but only if you aren't yourself. If it's only not you. And that's kind of a wellness, like thermometer check I do. When I move into different environments, I'll do it with myself, I do it with communities, but I know moving forward, it will be different for all of us because we all are being asked to make decisions about our lives and about our collective connection to people in our cultures and outside, even in our own families. And we don't have to do anything. We just be who we are, because it's going to rise up when you're connected to yourself. When you're caring, your caregiving is because you also included yourself in that formula for wellness. And a lot of the wellness movement, it's not even it's like a way, it's beyond a way of life, it's who we are. That's why all the blossoming of all those seeds that were planted, in the 1970s, when we could be visible again under safety of law, not our law, somebody else's. We could be visible again. But the seeds from farther back, the techniques, the cultural practices and protocols that got us here today, centuries ago. They got us to, 1200. And I'd like to see, instead of BC or AD or anything like that, I'd like to see a year where we just acknowledge like the indigenous calendars. Because now, they admit there's 4 ways to see time on the calendar. Well, for my people, it's a different time all the time, because we're in time, kind of. It's kind of like doing the jitterbug during an owl dance at a powwow, But so that concept of where we're at today, and as the sun sets and another sunrise comes up, we're going to walk out differently. And that's really my wish for myself, that I see the green grass. I'll see it any way that happens, but that we all make it there, that we transition through this, and that we see those many winters. Because often winter is a time, or coldness or storms or any of those atmospheric events, there's a renewal in there. And there's a promise that another change will come after winter. Another change will come after the heavy rain or after the drought. Or we will adjust, because that's also in a lot of the cultural teachings, how you adjust when the whole world changes. So it isn't that we deny or we go into our bubbles and don't understand we're in a global pandemic, or if we crack jokes. That's our strength talking. That's our resilience is an active condition. And we win the all around resilient warriors on the earth, Indigenous people. And in that is the coup story, or the victory story. And in that presence of understanding what we've achieved by living, by just being you, we're all those living stories of fantastical strength. Even if some days it's hard, if there are still things that you're dealing with, or with maybe just what you wish, your wish list, it's kind of like, I was gonna make a joke about one of the large at-home deliverers, but I won't, because you have to use their name. But that concept of a wish list, I some days feel I don't need a wish list, because I have learned about, during this time, kind of like what matters. And I still have hopes and dreams, and I still have air miles, but there is also a comfort in just enduring. And that's also recognizing that in wellness, is that's not embracing, or there's an embracing of everything that includes enduring, of getting through, of survival, of getting to the next event in your life. But it's just a small moment, because all emotions change, all thoughts change. That's part of living. And in wellness, there's been much talk prior to the pandemic and then now about how we deal with it's like the T-Rex of wellness, trauma. And like that word, don't let it scare you. Because all it says is, in those moments when you had to endure or you had to survive not to be yourself, they have a consequence, they have an impact in your life. But wellness is that principle that we carry from long before, that we carry in our DNA, that you can move forward. This is a time that may go on the winter count. But what may go on the winter count instead is the time when people start gathering again. The time when we've shifted and marks another season of our wellness for all Indigenous people, but in Indian country. That we're on that brink, because we've learned a lot, all ages, children, The generations that were born during this time, they're coming to different communities. They're coming in a time when they were given life. So all of those new babies that have come during this time, their path, the energy they came into is different than maybe where everybody they just lived by each other, but caring for your neighbor, caring for somebody through a GoFund, or who was in need. You writing letters again, sending post office, even a message, a prayer. So those babies have come into a different time, a different community. But for us as a living generation, regardless of where you are on that spectrum, we know a lot. We have our resulted practices to get through this and to connect, to belong to the future. And that's like a principle that's shared across every culture, the working towards living so the people can continue. So, all the relations can move forward. The human family, the cooperation of thinking about people in other continents by what you do to your spot from Earth. So all of those challenges have been met to degrees, but that's really what wellness is. It's about moving through maybe those personal pandemics, or where maybe you had a caretaker that you had to not be you in order to receive care. And it's coming through those. So whether you call it a winter calm or you have another measurement of time in your culture, that's really what wellness is, wellness and caring. It's moving towards, moving out, putting those things aside along your journey, that you don't need them. They're there, but you don't need them. You make that decision. And the will that is part of the gift of life to live. That's like our only, if you want to say, our only activity. And then we have those cultural principles and values that guide us. But in wellness, it includes everybody. It doesn't matter. It includes everybody. And in many communities, they figured out how to welcome people back to the community to belong again. Because many of my teachers that are in the spirit world, but that touch my living life, they had that same message. How do we belong? We belong by belonging. And really the wellness, if I want to say, the movement, as we move to a new place in the cycle, the hoop of wellness, that means everybody. That we recognize that there are a lot of challenges, but so what? What haven't there been challenges? I always tease somebody, like when they think things are too hard. Well, I'm not asking you to milk a buffalo. And, but really, that's what the wellness movement is. It's belonging. It's honoring people's journey. It's honoring your place in the circle and the gifts that you have, so that we can all move forward as who we are, our authentic selves, our real selves. And that's caregiving. And so I just want to really give thanks to you for joining the Native Wellness Power Hour. And I wish you all a good day and a good sleep. And I'm just glad we had this time together. And until I see you again, somewhere, somehow, take care.